Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how to operate in tight labor markets, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Cindy Klein. Welcome, Cindy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. Can you tell our audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I am currently working at talent.com, and I've actually been in digital marketing for over 25 years and in the recruitment advertising space for 15 years. And I've worked at some of the largest job boards in the world, including Indeed and ZipRecruiter.
All right. Well, so as we know that, this is the great resignation, but whether or not we're in, this moment in time versus other times where talent has been tight, that can obviously cause a lot of issues for organizations who are trying to stay competitive. So what are your let's start back at the beginning and talk about what are some of the key indications that we're in a tight market versus maybe just a hard to fill role?
Yeah, I think it's supply and demand. I think that's the biggest thing. There's a lot of supply out there and not as, there's a lot of demand and not enough supply. So I think that's the challenge. I think there's, it's a candidate market right now. The candidates have the choice of any job that they want. And, that's the challenge.
And how are we seeing that play out a little bit when you say, so because it's a candidate's market, often we talk about that with the housing market, it's a buyer's market or a seller's market. It usually means that, if it's a buyer's market, they get more, they can demand more. So are we seeing trends around what candidates are asking for?
Yes, absolutely. So, I think it used to be candidates wanted more in benefits, for example. Now it's not just more about benefits. I mean, we're seeing it firsthand at our own company. I think salaries have increased, significantly year over year. What we were, able to get, many times we're getting people to ask 20% more, 15% more in salaries. And it's not just that, it's more about benefits, not just healthcare benefits. It's what else are you offering as an organization, employee referrals, what is your 401k plan, what are your work-life balance programs, what is your gym memberships, what are those type of things. And that's what people are looking for. It's not just always about salary, but it's about the whole package that you're offering.
And are you finding maybe new benefits that haven't been so important being kind of pushed more, or anything kind of unusual in that space?
Yeah, I think it's what are you offering for the environment too? Environment or other, things other partnerships that you're doing within the organization. Do you have days where you let the employees go out and do other things for companies to, better themselves? So maybe not necessarily a specific organization, but do you have those group efforts or maybe individual efforts? And that's a big thing, where can you volunteer?
Do you think that employees are maybe even being more critical in value alignment, I guess, with a company, and whether, they're not just looking for a job, they're looking for, someplace that their values align and the culture is more of a fit, maybe?
Yes, culture fit is a big hot topic in our organization as we're growing. So we're looking to double our capacity of employees this year. So we're going from 400 to close to 800 by, next year. And culture fit as a global organization is a big topic. And how do we make that culture fit globally? And how do we have those individual cultures within each country? And I think that's a big piece. I think people want to feel as part of a culture. They want to feel like, their family, maybe a family organization, maybe not so much of a corporate America necessarily. They want to feel part of something.
Yeah. We hear a lot of that in our organization. Of when people join us, it's because they feel lost in their other organizations and they want that startup feel. And, so one of my big questions is how do you scale while still maintaining that same feel of a startup? Because I don't think there's many companies out there that have really done that well.
Yeah, and I think it's a hot topic with a lot of companies as they grow, is that how do you maintain that startup feel?
Mm.
I've been at organizations where they've gone from 500 to 10,000, 15,000. And I think the key there is that not one size fits all. And I think that's a big piece of it. And so one of the things that we're trying to do as an organization to say, if you're in North America, you're going to have different leadership teams that are going to really embed that culture within that country. And then, we'll have some basic, culture across the organization, but each country will have a different culture and a different fit based on kind of their needs.
Absolutely. Well, so let's talk about a little bit how we solve the problem. So if it is a candidate's market, then what are we suggesting that companies do?
Yeah, I don't think it's just about posting your job out there anymore. And once at one point it was just about posting a job, and you would be able to make that hire pretty quickly. It's really setting yourself apart. So it's employer brand. A lot of it is around employer brand. What are you doing in the marketplace to get your brand out there? What's setting yourself uniquely within your job posting too. It's not necessarily, you don't want a 2-page job posting, but what makes you different, not having your template up front. It's about, setting up what's different about your organization, making it very easy for the candidate to navigate and get to the job. My husband is interviewing right now and going through the process, and he's like, everything is so time consuming. So I think that's the other thing, making it very simple. It's also, making sure that you are doing different ways of reaching out to those candidates. And when they do come in for an interview, making it seamless and simple.
Mm. How much do you think that you mentioned the experience? What elements do you think are um, that candidates really notice in that experience of applying and interviewing?
I think they have most candidates notice response time.
Mm.
I think it would be acceptable to respond in 3 to 5 days. That's no longer acceptable. You need to respond within the same day. And otherwise, that candidate has already applied to 10 other jobs, and they're going to get a response from another organization very quickly in this type of marketplace. So I think response time is a key thing, and also follow through. If you have your recruiting team reaching out to them and scheduling a time, just make sure that they follow through and get an appointment on the calendar right away.
Do you think there's much, though, I guess, from the technology side in that, or is that just more of a benefit on the employer side of being quicker, but, all that automation and, connecting all connecting the experience through automation. Do you think the candidate sees much of that, or is that more just about being efficient in our responses?
No, I think absolutely automation will help.
Mm.
I think that's probably where the recruitment industry is lacking compared to the consumer industry. I think everyone wants to get to the point of the Amazons of the world where, a job is fed to you just like your your experience on Amazon. So I think, where everyone is getting one step closer to that, but also you want to be able to just do that one-click apply and just be able to easily connect with that employer and not have to do the same experience on 15 different sites.
I have to say that's one of the biggest complaints I've seen out on LinkedIn and stuff is the having to upload your resume and yet still fill out the application.
Correct. It's so tedious. And, I've never understood in all my years in this industry, why in the world do I have to, submit my resume and then also fill out the application? It just seems so backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your thought on a lot of companies, and I've even seen this, obviously as consulting, is sometimes the number of interviews a candidate has to go through. I've found some of our clients have lost good candidates because basically the time it takes to schedule all of those interviews. But let's say you can even do it quickly. What is your thought about the number of interviews that candidates go through?
Yeah, as we revamp kind of our process internally, that's a hot topic here too. And I'm a firm believer you need no more than 3 interviews in the process. And the reason being is that the more steps you put in the process, the less likely you're going to get that candidate to come in the door, because, you know, they're interviewing at other places and it delays the process. So, you know, we're really forming where we try to do, you know, one-on-one, but also committee interviews. So we get a good mix from multiple teams, so they understand the culture of the organization too. And you know, I think that's a really important piece, so that they really see not just the team that they're going to be on, but other teams within the organization. But you know, some companies I've worked with, you know, they have a very long, tedious process. But I think with the pandemic, and I think with video conferencing, people have learned to streamline that process quite a bit.
Yeah. And I think that it's the speed of decision making right now that is so critical. But I guess you have to balance that though with, you know, you don't want to be so much in a rush that you make a bad hire, because a bad hire is still expensive. So do you have insights around how you know, make sure you have a quality candidate without having to do, you know, 4 or 5 interviews?
Yeah, we absolutely. I think the key is, like, one of the things that we do is we have our HR person vet, or TA person vet that candidate through like a vetting process, and then sends that over to the sales manager, and that sales manager will, or sales leader or CS leader, depending on the leader, will vet that candidate. But I think you're absolutely right. You have to be careful, because you don't want to go too quickly, because then you run the risk of making a bad hire, which in turn can actually hurt you more. So I think it's really important that you find the right steps for your organization depending on the role. So you will find that in our engineering department, they will have one additional step in the process because they need to do a technical role interview.
Do you think that the future, you know, for decades, it feels like they've talked about how flawed interviewing is in general, with you know, just all the biases that can creep in on it, you know, subconscious biases, how, you know, that you both on your best behavior, you know, just countless of things that you know, make the interviewing process flawed. Do you see any changes though, starting to, you know, arise? Or
I think there will be changes to come. I think companies are hesitant to make changes to the process, but I think because of the candidate market, organizations are starting to change. But there are biases. I hope that we will change. And I think every organization needs to evaluate that change, because you know, we need to get out of our own way of doing what we've known to do in the past.
Mm. What do you think are some of the biggest things then that, you know, if a company is reviewing their talent acquisition process, like what are some steps they can do to self-diagnose, you know, how successful their process is?
You know, I think looking at a couple of different things, look at a process from when a recruiter gets the application. Number one, how long does it take for that recruiter to, you know, go through the sourcing? Because one of the things I've seen is sometimes it takes 3 to 5 days for the recruiter to even get through, and how they prioritize the applications. That's one thing too. They prioritize applications based on what they feel is the best source. And that's not always where the candidates are from. So I think that's number one. I also think they need to understand, you know, what are the different steps in the process, and is there areas that they can remove immediately out of that process that will, you know, if they see that something's taking 7 to 10 days from step 1 to step 2, maybe to get to the hiring manager, are there other people within that process that could be interviewing to alleviate that 7 or 10 day window? And then when we're doing, you know, background checks as well as, you know, offer letters, is there something that can be done and simultaneously, a background check and an offer letter together? So because that sometimes can take 5 to 7 business days, depending on the company.
Yeah. You mentioned branding earlier, and how that can play in the importance of candidates finding and selecting your company. If we're talking about smaller companies, you know, that mid-size, how do you, you said you've have some background in marketing. So how do you, get known and seen when maybe you aren't the biggest company?
Yeah, I think that, there's a couple different ways. I think really advertising, you can compete. That's the advantage of pay-per-click advertising. All of this, once many years ago, it wasn't like that. You had to place a billboard, or you had to place a big ad somewhere. Now with pay-per-click, everyone has a budget, and based on your, job title, based on your job description and how it's written, you do have the ability to compete in the marketplace. And that's a real advantage to mid-market and small SMB organizations. They can compete on all of the job board sites. And so they just determine what their allocated budget is and what their jobs. I think the key is just, what is your job title going to be, and making sure you have a very strong job description with keywords in there that are relevant to the job title.
So that the SEO picks it up, is that
correct? So it helps in the actual search within the job site.
And how do you, when you go out and you look at the breadth of job descriptions, I mean, they're all over the board, from really short to extremely long, and seems a little idealistic. Do you have thoughts and approaches or best practices for good job descriptions?
Yeah, for best practices, I think it's, you want to be as straightforward as possible. I would limit it to an intro, a very short intro about the company, and keep it as bulleted as possible, with very high level, really talk about the job in bulleted format and what the benefits of the organization are, and then link off to the job description. It should be no more than a couple of actual content paragraphs within the bullets in the job description.
Okay. What is your, when you're thinking about the candidate, then, do you have any observations around how they can find the company that's best fit for them? I mean, I know we said it's a candidate market, but just curious if there's something you'd seen.
Yeah, so a couple things. So the candidate typically has the ability to search by employer on most job board sites. So they can search if they have a brand that they're in mind. So again, it's important for that organization that is advertising, or even getting organic search where their job is being pulled in on certain job boards, to have a good job description, a good job title. So a good example of that would be, let's say a healthcare job, an RN nursing, RN nurse. You don't want to put RN nurse, Bethesda, Maryland, 12345 as the rec number in the job. You really just want RN or registered nurse in that job description, and it'll search, allow the candidate to be able to find that job based on the organization, because it'll be tied in their job description. The key is to make sure your company name is in your job description. Sometimes people forget to put that in. And then also make sure that, the actual job title is in that job description, as well as it's being fed into your career site.
What do you, are there different ways, let me think about how to restate this. Different generations, do they all respond to ads and postings the same way, or do we see a difference from the millennials to Gen Z, baby boomers, etc.?
Absolutely, they respond in different ways. I think the Gen Zs, and they definitely want as quick as possible. Those one-click applies. They want to just put their name, phone number, and email, and they want the application sent. The boomers are more willing to go through a 45-minute application process, and they'll sit and have the patience to do that. But I think the shorter, the less steps in the process, the more likely you will get the candidate.
What about from attracting them in general perspective? Is there a way to do they respond the same way, or are there just different ways to kind of go at actual?
Yeah, I think it's Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I think, we like in talent.com, we have different sources of traffic. So we have SMS, text messaging, and email versus maybe going directly on talent or our mobile application. So you'll find that, the millennial, they're definitely on the mobile application. They're on using SMS, they're definitely using SMS as a way of means of doing the application process. Whereas, the boomers are on the talent, on the desktop version of talent.com. So it's really tailoring that message, but making sure it's friendly for whoever the candidate is and wherever they're coming in experience. So you always want to make sure it's mobile friendly, ability to see it and apply on your mobile site, because mobile, less than 5 years ago was maybe 40 or 50% of traffic. And now, depending on the category, it's 80%. So transportation would be a good example of that. So a truck driver is typically in the truck. You will see that has grown. It used to be in the 60 percentile, even just a couple years ago, and now it's 80 percentile. So they're always on a mobile device using a mobile application.
And so what does it mean then, to use, I've heard the term multi-channel sourcing. What does that mean when you're looking for candidates?
So I think when looking for candidates, they're looking, typically a candidate is going to anywhere from 8 to 15 sites to actually apply for the job. So they're not just going to one-stop shop. So it's really important from a employer standpoint, you're in front of that candidate multiple times, because they might look for a job on one site and then they actually apply in 3 other places. And I know that seems so counterintuitive for anyone in the industry to say, why wouldn't you just go one place and just apply and then get your application put into, an organization? But that is not what candidates do. They go, and so it's multi-touch too. So you want to make sure that you have that brand and your brand up front in front of them at all times.
And are we seeing any, like, is the distribution of candidates broken across sites any different, like LinkedIn versus Seek or Indeed or whatever? I mean, do certain groups use certain ones more, or is any of those platforms rising to the top?
So I think Indeed is definitely dominated over the last handful of years. They have the largest global market share. LinkedIn is much more of that social platform in the sense of, people are using it more of a community network. But, as far as the job seeker, we all serve the same type of jobs. So we're all searching from the hourly space to engineers to healthcare. So we are able to find, the candidate can find jobs in all of those on all of the sites, including talent.com. So I think it's just where the candidate goes. And that's why candidates, I think from a candidate perspective, they really look at as, well, if I apply on Indeed and I apply on Talent and then I go to LinkedIn and apply, the likelihood that the recruiter is going to call me is very high.
Okay. What do you, how much do you think that the remote or flexible working is coming in now with candidates' demands?
It's very high. So in the pandemic, it was actually our most searched word. It still continues to be one of our highest search words: work from home, remote. I think, as organizations kind of figure out this going back to work, is that now we're seeing flexible work from home is still a highly searched word. And what we're finding is that candidates want to make sure that that is still an option. So if you are going to have that flexible working schedule 2 days a week, you need to put that in your job description or in job title. So if it's work from home or part-time work from home, make sure you're putting that in and be upfront with your candidate. Because it is a deciding factor when people are even considering the role.
You're talking about putting that in, and yeah, that makes sense. I've noticed some states have moved to that you are supposed to put the salary in the job description, and just, I can kind of see an argument on both sides, and I'm just curious what you've seen and if you think we're going to end up one way versus the other.
I think it still will be state by state, at least, in the US. I think it will remain that way for a while. I think putting the salary is an important piece. I think every time probably any TA person out there will say, every conversation now with a candidate is one of the first questions out of either the recruiter's mouth or the candidate's mouth. Someone is always asking, what is the salary range if it's not posted? So being upfront and honest will help save time on the talent acquisition team, and also save time on the candidate side. So I don't think putting the salary out there is a bad thing.
So, one of the things that I guess I wonder though is would it end up wasting time, I guess, on the company's side? As in, do you think if it's a really well-paying job that then you get a bunch of people who are applying who really shouldn't be applying?
Well, I think that still is to be determined. I think you
Mhm.
have to determine if the people that are applying, maybe they still aren't the right fit for the organization, but I think the hope is that some of those people will at least be vetted out before applying for those jobs.
Mhm. Mm.
But the one negative to having salaries is that you might not get candidates that might be a good fit for another position. So maybe they've applied to a position, and we see that a lot in our organization, is that they applied to one position, maybe aren't the perfect fit, but we have another position that might be a better fit for them. So you lose that opportunity to find another place for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are some metrics that maybe should be tracked, to understand how successful? I mean, I know there's the obvious ones of time to fill um, and those basic things, but is there any other data that we're starting to see become valuable?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that you need to look at not only just time to fill, but also how when you get the rec. And I know that it depends on how you're tracking time to fill. And I think that's the big piece, is like, what is your definition of time to fill? Is it the time that the hiring manager gets it, or is it the time that the applicant applied? And I think that's one thing. I also it's important to track the steps in the process. So how long is it taking from step one of the process to step two, and so on? Because time to fill is great to close that gap, but then can you make the gaps between the different steps in the process shorter?
Mm.
And that's what we're seeing organizations starting to track more of. And you saw that a lot during the pandemic, when there was a really big need for healthcare and some of these key roles, and in the hourly space. You saw companies to say, wait a second, we can't wait 3 months or 60 days for a nurse now. We need to shorten that gap. And how do we shorten it? And let's determine, can we eliminate some steps in our process?
Yeah, absolutely. What about any metrics around the type of candidates that are coming in, and whether it's from a diversity perspective or just quality of candidates, or are there things that we're starting to track there more, just to see what's coming through?
Yeah, I think every organization is starting to track more from a diversity perspective. I think it's a hot topic in the industry, and a big piece that companies want to track and make sure that they're capturing all candidates and looking at that. So I think from a media standpoint, I think not every organization has that capability yet, and I think that's something that will change and evolve over the time. But I think that is a piece that organizations are starting to really be more aware of. That is an important piece during the candidate journey.
Mm. Oh, those are great tips. So Cindy, I'd love to hear what you would kind of leave as your top three points that you want to get through to the audience.
Yeah. So one of the things I would say, the first point is short, as much as possible, shorten the candidate experience, make it as quick as possible in this type of market. I think evaluate your overall job descriptions, your process for your ATS process. How do you make it as quick as possible in that sense? A one-click apply, or take steps out of that ATS process. And then also look at candidates that are coming in, and are there transferable skills? So maybe they apply for one job, but is there another job that might work for them?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Cindy, for being a guest. Would love to hear, or how can you let us know how people can get in touch with you or learn more about your organization?
Yeah, you can reach me at Cindy M. Klein at LinkedIn or Cindy at talent.com.
All right. Thanks so much, Cindy.
Thank you.
And into our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.